Hello, hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're adding to our series on foods from TV and film with some inspiration from this scene from How I Met Your Mother.
And I'll be home trying to get over the fact that no one invited me to the big hair washing party.
All right, fine. Guess it'll just be me and Zoe.
Oh, wait, just the two of you? Rule number 1.
Don't use the husband's condoms. That's just rude.
No sharing food. In fact, anything involving saliva is off limits.
Alrighty, so as far as I can tell, and I generally make this assumption pretty much anytime I see that iconic bright red coloring in Chinese food, my best assumption here is that what Barney is eating is a Chinese-American dish called sweet and sour chicken. Its origins, as you may have guessed, very much comes from American food, and for this reason very prominently features the use of both canned pineapple and the pineapple syrup that it's canned in for an almost aggressively sweet quality. It's commonly paired with a handful of other colorful veggies like red bell pepper and sweet white onion, and of course makes use of the all-American classic condiment, ketchup, in order to achieve that bright red color that you know and love. Today I'm going to be dialing back a little bit our ketchup use in favor of some sweet chili sauce instead for a more complex sweetness, but if you're particularly attached to that bright red coloring though, definitely lean into the ketchup more. Lastly, we'll also be using one of my favorite go-to fried chicken recipes with a double-fried carbonated soda water tempura batter, which yields, in my opinion, the best fried chicken results in a Chinese glazed chicken dish like this one that I have ever managed. So, let's get into it.
I'm falling in love with love and it's bringing me down. Do you want to be?
Okay, so kicking things off as with many of our stir fries, I'm starting by crushing and mincing 4 cloves of garlic, followed by peeling and then fine mincing 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of ginger. Then next, I'm separating the whites and greens of some green onions, slicing the whites up thinly to be used along with our aromatic garlic and ginger elements, and then separately slicing the greens on a bias to be used for our finishing garnish. Then next up, diving into our veggies, we're going with half of a sweet white onion here and a whole red bell pepper, which should create some really gorgeous colors in our finished dish. I'm doing a large dice on my onion here, remember to keep that root end on for your onion dices, and then I'm slicing up my bell pepper from the top downward by slicing around its core. If you've never done this trick with a bell pepper, it's super useful and just makes removing the core of a bell pepper way easier. I'm also pulling out the membrane here because this stuff gets really bitter in a wok fry, and then I'm going to give these a similar large dice to match the size of our onion. Moving on to our chicken, I'm going with some chicken thigh here, mainly because it was what was defrosted in my fridge. You can certainly use chicken breast too though if you'd like. The dark meat and extra fat in our chicken thigh is not going to be particularly useful today in a fried chicken recipe like this, so chicken breast would probably taste the same too. I'm giving these another large dice and then setting them up with a pretty simple marinade of 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine, a tablespoon of sesame oil, half a teaspoon of white pepper, and finally a pinch of kosher salt. Then I'm setting this aside to marinate for 30 minutes or up to 1 hour while we move on to our sauce. First up, in my opinion, is maybe the most important element to this dish, which is half a cup of pineapple syrup, which, if you're not familiar, is the liquid that canned pineapples are preserved in. It is also commonly used in a lot of cocktails, so if you prefer, or if you're using fresh pineapple, you can also find this stuff sold on its own too. I'm combining this with 4 tablespoons of sweet chili sauce and 2 tablespoons of ketchup to round out our sweet elements. Once again, if you are trying to recreate that bright red color in sweet and sour chicken, feel free to lean harder into the ketchup element at this point. Then next up is a whole load of rice vinegar. That's a 1/4 cup's worth, it is in the name after all. And then I'm rounding this all out with 2 tablespoons of doubanjiang and a pinch of kosher salt to give this just a hint of heat. Finally, I'm dissolving 2 tablespoons of cornstarch here in some water for our cornstarch slurry, and we're moving on to our tempura batter. Okay, so I'm setting up 3 bowls here for my tempura batter because we're going to kick things off by separating the whites of 2 eggs. I'm cracking an egg over one bowl, then separating the yolk and setting it aside in the second bowl, and then depositing the separated white into my largest bowl before cracking the next egg. The goal here is to avoid the risk of accidentally dropping yolk into your egg whites, so don't do what I just did here because this completely defeats the point. Anyway, next up is a 1/4 cup each of AP flour, cornstarch, and soda water, which I'm whisking to combine until a smooth batter forms. If you've done this correctly, the soda water should start producing air pockets in the batter from its CO2, which is going to help us create the fluffiest fried chicken that you have ever experienced. Ooh. Next up, I'm adding my marinated chicken to the batter, being careful to hold back that liquid marinade as best that I can to prevent our batter from getting too loose. I'm giving this all a toss to combine, and we're heading over to the stove. Alright, so over on the stove, we're going to be going with the always reliable Kenji Lopez Alt double fry technique to help us create some super crispy fried chicken. I'm going in batches here about 10 to 12 pieces at a time and letting my first batch fry at 350 degrees F for about 2 minutes before removing and resting for 5 minutes while I fry the remainder of my chicken. Then I'm heating my fryer up to 400 degrees F and adding my chicken back to the wok again 10 to 12 pieces at a time for our second fry, this time for a full 3 to 5 minutes or until that chicken turns a deep golden brown. Then I'm removing these very carefully. Remember that fryer oil is real scary and dangerous. And then I'm setting these down to cool on a wire rack while we move on to our wok fry. Back over on the stove, I've removed my fryer oil and wiped down my wok. Then I'm reheating, adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and, as always, long yao for that non-stick surface. Then next, we're starting things off with my veggies first. This is my bell pepper going in for a 1-minute head start, followed by my onions, which I'm tossing for 2 minutes until they're just past their raw stage. Those onions should still be fairly crispy here at this point. Then I'm pulling these veggies out, reheating, giving my wok 1 more long yao, and then we're adding my aromatic garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions. We're blooming these until they're fragrant for about 10 seconds, then followed up immediately with my sauce mixture plus my cornstarch slurry. Now, this bit is super important in order to keep our chicken crispy. We're reducing our sauce here until it resembles a pretty thick glazed texture, sort of like a loose maple syrup quality. It's going to look a little like there's not enough sauce to stretch, but I promise it's going to stretch throughout the dish okay. Once we have the right texture, I'm adding my chicken back to the wok, followed by my veggies and about half a cup of that diced canned pineapple that our pineapple syrup came from. Then I'm killing the heat, giving all of this a very quick toss to combine and immediately removing it from the wok. It's real important at this point that that sauce does not continue to cook the chicken here, because if it does, that chicken is going to turn real mushy real fast. Not fun. Finally, I'm finishing this all off with some toasted sesame seeds and the greens of my green onions, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so admittedly, I'm not particularly a huge fan of Chinese sweet and savory dishes like this one, but this is actually one of my favorite fried chicken recipes that we have done in a while. You'll notice that I did go quite out of my way to do a bit more than just create sweet and sour flavors here. The depth of flavor and umami that comes from our marinade is surprisingly apparent. The savory sweetness from our chili sauce cuts the more aggressive syrupy qualities from our pineapple syrup, and the heat from our doubanjiang is a fairly gentle contrast to all of the sweeter elements that we included. Then, despite what you might think when adding an entire 1/4 cup of rice vinegar to anything really, those sour qualities mellow out quite a bit as the sauce reduces in the wok fry, giving us a nice subtle brightness. Finally, as expected, our double fried tempura batter worked perfectly for a super crunchy piece of fried chicken that held up its crispiness surprisingly well once it was coated in our glaze. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. Some of you might notice, but a lot of this recipe is actually borrowing from many of the other fried chicken recipes that we have done in this series already, including General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, Korean gochujang glazed fried chicken, and more. So definitely check out some of those next too if you haven't yet. We'll also be cooking through this one live this coming Monday right here on YouTube at 6:30 PST, so tune in then and cook along with me too if you'd like. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, press some buttons, be nice internet people, and I'll see you soon.
Yes, I still got through the more like a took it of my 20s and it's breaking me for me.